What Edgar Cayce revealed about Christ's cosmic power was not a vague metaphor, not a poetic invention, but a documented reality that came through in his trance sessions. Imagine this. During the height of the Great Depression, when millions of Americans were living in despair, a man in Virginia Beach would lie down on a couch, close his eyes, enter a self-induced sleep, and begin to speak words that no one expected. In one of his most striking sessions of 1932, Cayce described Jesus not only as a historical figure, but as the living channel of a universal force that transcended human comprehension. He explained that Christ represented the ultimate vibration of creation itself, the same energy that formed galaxies, stars, and the consciousness of humankind. This was not a religious sermon. It was a radical revelation. And here is where most people are shocked. Cayce said that this cosmic Christ power was not locked away in heaven, but available within every soul who chose to awaken it. What does this mean? That the very energy that kept the universe alive could also heal a sick body, transform a broken mind, and realign a lost life. During another session that changed the life of an entire family, Cayce explained that through prayer aligned with Christ's vibration, diseases that doctors had declared irreversible could be reversed. What happened next left even skeptics speechless. The man known as the sleeping prophet spoke with precision. He didn't use grand theology or speculation. He spoke of forces he claimed were as real as gravity. When asked about Jesus, Cayce often paused, breathing deeply, and then explained that Christ's cosmic power was the pattern of the human soul before it became entangled in material illusions. He said that to live in harmony with that force meant returning to the original blueprint of creation. Imagine being in that room. A family torn apart by illness, worry, and economic collapse listened as Cayce, with closed eyes and steady voice, described a healing process that didn't start with medicine, but with aligning one's mind and heart to the same vibration Christ carried. He called it the Christ pattern. And here's what nobody expected. Those who followed the recommendations, whether it was prayer, meditation, or specific lifestyle adjustments, often saw results doctors could not explain. A woman once bedridden began walking again. A child who suffered chronic seizures began to recover. Skeptics argued coincidence, but the documented reports filed in the Association for Research and Enlightenment archives still exist to this day. These weren't isolated miracles, they were repeated patterns, and in every one of them Cayce pointed back not to himself, but to the living presence of Christ's cosmic power available to anyone willing to connect. But let's not forget the context. These revelations didn't come in an era of comfort. They came when America was in deep pain. The 1930s were marked by hunger, unemployment, and uncertainty about the future. People needed answers, and churches were not enough for everyone. In Virginia Beach, people would travel from distant states just to sit in a small room where Edgar Cayce slept and spoke truths that shook their core beliefs. He said, "Christ is not a figure of 2,000 years ago. Christ is the living power within you now." That was a sentence that froze the air. Imagine being told that the same energy that created stars was available in your own prayers, your own thoughts, your own acts of love. This wasn't philosophy, it was instruction. Cayce described how meditation could tune the mind to higher frequencies, where the Christ force could heal, guide, and uplift. He explained that every thought carried vibration, and those who aligned with the higher vibration of Christ naturally attracted strength, health, and wisdom. And when people doubted, he gave evidence. He diagnosed illnesses without seeing the patients, describing organs, conditions, and treatments that were later confirmed by physicians. His accuracy was so consistent that even doctors had to admit there was something extraordinary happening. And always, Cayce credited this ability to the Christ consciousness. Not his own mind, but the universal mind accessible through alignment with Christ's power. Pause here and think. If this is true, if Cayce was not imagining but tapping into a real force, then the implications are staggering. It means that healing is not only a matter of medicine, but of vibration. It means that transformation is not limited to therapy, but to tuning into a universal current that Christ himself embodied. And Cayce made it clear. Jesus was not an exception to humanity, but the example of humanity. His power was not exclusive. It was the destiny of every soul. The Christ force, according to Cayce, is the divine pattern imprinted in all of us, waiting to be awakened. The problem is that most people live disconnected, trapped in fear, selfishness, and material illusions. But when a person chooses faith, love, and service, they begin to resonate with that higher pattern. And this is where the unimaginable happens. Bodies begin to heal, minds begin to find peace, lives begin to transform. This was not abstract spirituality, it was applied truth. And families across America, from Kentucky to Ohio, testified that their lives were never the same after encountering Cayce's sessions. One doctor who attended said, "What I saw defies medical logic, but I cannot deny the results." What Cayce revealed was not about converting people to a religion. It was about reminding them that they were already connected to the greatest power the universe had ever known. During the years of war, when young men were being sent overseas and families feared receiving telegrams with the worst news imaginable, Edgar Cayce continued to speak about Christ's cosmic power as the only real anchor of peace. Imagine this setting: a dimly lit room in Virginia Beach. A group of anxious parents gathered while Cayce entered his self-induced trance. Their questions were about life and death, about sons on distant battlefields, about whether survival was even possible in a world torn apart. And in that fragile silence, Cayce revealed something astonishing. He said that Christ's vibration was not limited by distance, that a prayer spoken in Virginia Beach could reach a soldier in France or the Pacific. He explained that consciousness itself was not bound by geography or time, but woven together through the Christ pattern that united all souls. What happened next was recorded. Families who followed his guidance, praying not in desperation, but in alignment with Christ's power, reported strange coincidences. Letters from their sons described miraculous escapes, close calls where they felt a sudden calm just before danger, as if a shield of light had protected them. Skeptics called it chance. But for the families who had felt helpless, this was no coincidence. This was proof that Christ's force, revealed through Cayce's words, could intervene in ways science could not explain. But here is the part that truly unsettled both theologians and scientists of his time. Cayce insisted that this was not magic, not blind superstition, but the natural law of vibration. Just as radio waves transmit messages through invisible currents, Christ's cosmic energy transmits life and protection through higher frequencies of thought and spirit. He even compared prayer to tuning a radio. If the dial is off, the signal is static, but when the mind aligns with the Christ frequency, the channel becomes clear and powerful. He emphasized that the difference between an unanswered prayer and a miraculous one was not about God refusing or granting, but about whether the person was truly aligned with the Christ force within. And this changed everything for those listening. They realized that prayer was not begging, it was tuning. Meditation was not escape, it was alignment. Service to others was not optional, it was resonance with the same law that Christ embodied. And slowly, families across America began to practice these principles, not just in churches but in their daily lives. Some created prayer groups that still exist today, inspired directly by Cayce's teachings, built on the belief that collective minds aligned in Christ's vibration could heal and uplift entire communities. Now let's step back into the historical frame. During the post-war years, America was entering a new era of prosperity, but also of existential searching. Material comfort returned, but people began asking deeper questions about meaning, about consciousness, about whether life was more than work and consumption. This is where Cayce's revelations became prophetic. He explained that Christ's cosmic power was not just about healing illness or surviving war, it was about the evolution of the soul. He said that humanity stood at a crossroads, that every generation would be tested on whether it would live in harmony with that divine vibration or continue down the path of division and materialism. And here's the shocking statement. Cayce declared that civilizations of the past, including Atlantean cultures, had collapsed not because of external forces, but because they failed to live according to the Christ pattern. Their technology and knowledge outpaced their spiritual alignment, and the result was destruction. He warned that modern civilization faced the same risk. That sentence echoed with urgency. The Christ force is the law of balance in the universe. To ignore it is to invite collapse. To live by it is to ensure survival, not only of individuals, but of nations. And yet, Cayce was not a prophet of doom. His words carried an unmistakable hope. He told people that awakening to Christ's cosmic power was possible for anyone, young, old, rich, poor, educated, uneducated. He said that the key was not in believing the right doctrine, but in living the right vibration. That meant practicing forgiveness even when it hurt. That meant choosing compassion when anger was easier. That meant daily aligning thought, prayer, and action with the Christ ideal. And over, documented testimonies showed that when people did this, lives changed. A businessman who had lost everything in the Depression rebuilt his life not by chasing profit, but by serving others in honesty and fairness. A mother who had lived in bitterness after losing a child found new joy by dedicating herself to prayer and acts of kindness. A young man addicted to alcohol slowly recovered by practicing Cayce's methods of meditation and Christ-centered living. These were not abstract examples. They were recorded stories preserved in the archives, and they continue to inspire seekers today. And this brings us to the deeper point. Cayce was not simply talking about Jesus as a figure of history. He was revealing the cosmic Christ as a force that still lives and moves within the fabric of reality. As the 1950s unfolded, Cayce's earlier words began to resonate even more strongly with those searching for answers beyond material progress. The United States was entering a new phase of modernity, suburbs expanding, television becoming a household presence, consumer culture booming. But beneath the surface, many felt an emptiness. In this context, the idea that Christ's cosmic power was a living force accessible to every individual struck a deeper chord. People began to realize that material comfort did not erase spiritual hunger, and Cayce had already pointed to this hunger years before, saying that the human soul would never be satisfied with things alone, because its true nourishment came from aligning with the eternal vibration of Christ. He warned that the coming decades would present humanity with temptations of distraction, false security, and shallow pursuits, but only those who remembered the Christ force within would find lasting peace. Imagine the contrast. Shiny new cars, endless advertisements, promises of happiness through products, and then the quiet, steady reminder that true fulfillment was already within, waiting to be awakened through prayer, meditation, and selfless service. What made Cayce different from preachers and philosophers of his time was the sheer weight of evidence. Families recorded the words, followed the instructions, and saw transformations unfold. Skeptics documented cases thinking they would disprove him, only to find that the results were undeniable. In one session that shocked even doctors present, Cayce described the internal organs of a man he had never met, explaining both the condition and the treatment. Later examinations confirmed the accuracy, and the man's health improved after following the guidance. But Cayce insisted again and again, this was not his power. It was Christ's cosmic force flowing through the channel of human alignment. He was only a conduit, and anyone who attuned themselves could experience the same miracles. This idea unsettled traditional institutions because it suggested that divine power was not mediated only by churches or hierarchies, but directly available to every soul. And yet, it was precisely this democratization of spiritual access that gave so many ordinary Americans hope. Let's step into the 1960s, a time of cultural upheaval, civil rights movements, protests, and a hunger for new spiritual identities. Even though Cayce had passed away in 1945, his words lived on through the ARE and the thousands of readings preserved. In that decade, seekers of all kinds, students, activists, philosophers, found in his work a bridge between ancient spirituality and modern consciousness. The idea that Christ's power was cosmic, not confined to one religion or one era, resonated with a generation that was questioning everything. Cayce's message fit perfectly. Christ was not a distant savior locked in history, but the living vibration of divine order, accessible to anyone willing to align with it. This is what made his teachings timeless. While others debated dogma, Cayce pointed people to practice. meditate daily, pray with sincerity, forgive even the deepest wounds, and live in service. And when people applied these practices, they discovered something astonishing. The same sense of presence and guidance Cayce had described decades earlier. But here's where the narrative becomes even more powerful. Cayce explained that Christ's cosmic energy was not only about healing individuals, but guiding the evolution of humanity itself. He said that every soul carried memories of past lives, that every challenge was an opportunity to grow closer to the Christ ideal, and that the ultimate destiny of humanity was to embody that power fully. He described the human journey as a return to oneness, a movement from separation and ignorance back to harmony with the source. And here's the sentence that echoes like thunder across the decades. The Christ Spirit is the pattern for all souls. That means Jesus was not meant to be worshipped as an unattainable figure, but followed as a model. His miracles were not exceptions, but demonstrations of what aligned consciousness could do. This was Cayce's radical gift, reframing Christ not as unreachable divinity, but as the universal template for what it means to be fully human. For a world still grappling with war, inequality, and division, this teaching was nothing less than revolutionary. As we move deeper into Cayce's legacy, one theme becomes clear. Christ's cosmic power was not abstract theory, but a living energy that touched every area of life, body, mind, and spirit. In one of his sessions during the early 1930s, a family approached him desperate for help with a child who had been suffering seizures since infancy. Traditional doctors had exhausted every option. Lying in trance, Cayce spoke calmly and said the seizures were connected not only to physical imbalances, but to vibrations in the child's nervous system that could be realigned through spiritual practices, diet, and daily prayer centered on the Christ pattern. The parents followed his instructions. Weeks later, the frequency of seizures decreased. Months later, the child's health showed undeniable improvement. What stunned the family was not only the healing itself, but Cayce's insistence that the real source of recovery was the Christ force moving through them. Not his words, not medical intervention alone, but the universal vibration of love and order that Christ embodied. This was not about creating dependence on Cayce, it was about awakening the divine connection within every soul, and that became the defining feature of his message. He consistently directed people away from worshipping him and toward practicing alignment with the Christ ideal. He would say, "Do not make an idol of any man. Look instead to the pattern of the Master." To Cayce, Jesus was not simply a savior who erased sins, but the living demonstration of what humanity could become when fully attuned to divine vibration. In multiple readings, he emphasized that Jesus was the perfect example, showing humanity the way back to its original design. And he made a bold claim that startled many, that each soul had the potential to manifest the same creative and healing forces if it chose to walk in harmony with the Christ Spirit. This turned spirituality from passive belief into active practice. It meant that healing, wisdom, and transformation were not miracles reserved for saints, but possibilities written into the blueprint of every human being. This leads to a question many asked. If Christ's cosmic power is within everyone, why don't we see miracles everywhere? Cayce's answer was simple, yet profound: alignment. He said that most people lived out of tune, trapped in fear, selfishness, and material distractions. Just as a radio cannot play music if it is set to the wrong frequency, a soul cannot manifest divine power if it resonates with doubt, hate, or greed. The path to awakening Christ's force, therefore, required deliberate choices: daily meditation, prayer, forgiveness, compassion, and service. These were not moral rules imposed from outside, but the natural conditions that tuned the soul to higher frequencies. When a person chose forgiveness over resentment, they stepped closer to alignment. When they chose service instead of selfishness, they vibrated in harmony with the Christ pattern. And in those moments, extraordinary things became possible. Families testified to impossible healings. Soldiers spoke of divine protection in war. Individuals discovered inner peace despite unbearable circumstances. Each story pointed back to the same truth. Christ's cosmic power was real, and it worked through those who aligned with it. The broader implication of Cayce's message was staggering. It suggested that human consciousness itself was the frontier where the greatest battles were fought. Wars, diseases, poverty, these were not only external problems, but reflections of inner disconnection from the Christ force. If enough individuals chose alignment, Cayce said, entire societies could transform. He even warned that the future of nations depended on their willingness to live by the Christ ideal of love and unity. Otherwise, like civilizations of the past, they would collapse under the weight of their own imbalance. This was not mere prophecy of doom, it was a call to responsibility. Every act of forgiveness, every prayer spoken with sincerity, every choice to serve rather than exploit was a contribution to the survival and evolution of humanity. Seen through this lens, Christ's cosmic power was not only a path for individuals, but the hope for civilization itself. And that is why his words remain so relevant today, in an age still plagued by conflict, division, and the illusion that material power alone can save us. As we follow Cayce's words into the later decades of his life, the vision of Christ's cosmic power became even more expansive. He spoke of it not only as a force for healing individuals or guiding nations, but as the very pattern through which the universe itself operates. During one of his documented sessions in Virginia Beach, he explained that the laws of physics, the rhythms of nature, and the cycles of human consciousness were all reflections of the Christ vibration. To him, Christ was not only a teacher in history, but the living blueprint of creation itself. This is why he called Jesus the pattern man, not to diminish his divinity, but to emphasize that what Christ demonstrated was the universal design of every soul. This revelation challenged both religion and science. For theologians, it meant Christ's role was larger than any church had taught. For scientists, it suggested that consciousness and cosmic order were inseparably linked. And for ordinary people, it was both humbling and empowering. Humbling because it revealed how far humanity had strayed from the pattern, empowering because it showed the way back was always within reach. This perspective also transformed the way people approached suffering. In multiple readings, Cayce explained that pain and difficulty were not punishments from God, but opportunities to realign with the Christ force. He gave the example of illness. Instead of seeing it as a curse, he urged individuals to see it as a signal, a reminder that something in body, mind, or spirit had drifted out of harmony. When addressed with prayer, meditation, and right action, suffering became the gateway to transformation. This idea was revolutionary for families who had felt crushed by despair. A woman battling chronic illness came to Cayce for guidance. In trance, he described her condition with precision and then explained how aligning her thoughts with forgiveness, combined with specific natural remedies, could restore her balance. Months later, she returned with renewed health. For her, the healing was physical, but the deeper transformation was spiritual. She no longer saw herself as a victim of fate, but as a soul rediscovering its alignment with the Christ vibration. This shift, from despair to empowerment, was the real miracle. Cayce's insistence on the practical nature of Christ's cosmic power is what continues to make his teachings timeless. He didn't present Christ as unreachable, existing only in ancient texts or distant heavens. He described Christ as the living vibration that anyone could touch in the stillness of meditation, in the sincerity of prayer, in the choice to forgive, and in the act of loving others without condition. He taught that the Christ Spirit was the true self of every soul, the essence waiting beneath layers of fear and ego, and he often used the language of resonance to explain it. Just as one tuning fork can cause another to vibrate when they are attuned, so too does Christ's vibration awaken the same pattern in us when we open ourselves. That meant every act of kindness was more than moral, it was cosmic alignment. Every prayer lifted in faith was more than hope, it was real contact with the universal force. And every moment of love was a spark of the same energy that created galaxies. This was Cayce's message, that Christ's cosmic power is not far away but within, waiting to be lived. The implications for the future were profound. Cayce warned that humanity's greatest test would come not from outside threats, but from whether it could live in harmony with the Christ pattern. He spoke of coming challenges, economic upheavals, social unrest, even earth changes, but always tied them to the spiritual condition of humanity. He explained that collective misalignment with divine law would manifest as chaos in the world, but collective alignment could bring a new era of peace. He even suggested that America's destiny as a nation was tied to whether it embraced service, compassion, and unity over selfishness and greed. For those listening, this was not just mystical speculation, it was a call to action. It meant that the choices of individuals mattered not only for their own lives, but for the survival and direction of the entire planet. And at the center of it all was the Christ vibration, the cosmic power that Cayce said was both the origin and the destiny of every soul. As Cayce's words echo into our present time, their urgency becomes impossible to ignore. He explained that Christ's cosmic power was not meant to remain hidden in archives or reserved for spiritual elites. It was meant to guide humanity into a new age of awakening. One of his most striking insights was that the evolution of the soul was not an abstract journey to some distant heaven, but a daily choice to embody the Christ vibration here and now. He often said that every thought is a seed, every act a vibration, and together they form the fabric of reality. This meant that the wars, conflicts, and divisions we see in the world are not just accidents of history, but reflections of collective consciousness failing to align with the Christ pattern. Conversely, every act of forgiveness, compassion, and truth-telling contributes to shifting the entire frequency of humanity. Imagine the implication. One person choosing love over hate does not just change their life. It becomes part of the invisible current shaping the future of the planet. Cayce also tied this cosmic principle directly to the mysteries of reincarnation and the soul's journey through time. He explained that each lifetime is an opportunity to come closer to alignment with Christ's vibration. Mistakes and failures are not final, they are lessons. Illnesses are not random, they are reminders. Relationships, even painful ones, are not accidents. They are chosen arenas where the soul learns love, patience, and forgiveness. And the ultimate goal of all these experiences is to awaken the divine pattern within until the soul fully resonates with Christ. In this way, Christ's power was not only the energy of creation, but the destiny toward which all creation moves. That means every soul, no matter how lost, no matter how burdened, is already marked with this eternal blueprint. Cayce's message was clear. You are not seeking God outside. You are rediscovering the Christ within. That sentence alone had the power to change lives because it shifted the focus from external searching to internal awakening. Perhaps the most compelling aspect of Cayce's revelations was their practicality. He did not leave people with lofty ideals without application. He gave step-by-step instructions. Meditate daily, even for 10 minutes, to quiet the mind and tune into higher vibrations. Pray with intention, not as begging, but as aligning with divine will. Practice forgiveness, even when the wound feels too deep, because holding on to resentment blocks the flow of Christ's force. Serve others, not out of obligation, but out of recognition that the Christ vibration flows strongest through love in action. And finally, guard your thoughts, because every thought resonates as energy. For those who applied these disciplines, life began to shift in ways they could not explain. They felt calmer in the face of crises. They recovered from illnesses that once seemed hopeless. They discovered clarity in making decisions that once paralyzed them. These were not coincidences. They were demonstrations of the Christ pattern awakening in daily life. So what does this mean for us today? It means that Christ's cosmic power, as revealed through Edgar Cayce, is not simply a theological idea, but a living force calling each of us to participate. The same energy that healed in the past, that guided soldiers in war, that restored broken families in the Depression, is still available now. And in a world drowning in noise, conflict, and division, Cayce's voice reminds us of a higher frequency, one that can heal the body, transform the mind, and unite humanity. The question is not whether the power exists, it does. The question is whether we will align ourselves with it. Will we live in fear, anger, and selfishness, or will we choose forgiveness, service, and love? The future of our lives, our communities, and even our world depends on that choice. Because as Cayce revealed again and again, the Christ vibration is the eternal law of creation, and those who align with it discover not only healing and peace, but the true destiny of the soul. And now, if this revelation touched your spirit, I invite you to reflect on how you can apply it today. Take a moment to think of one act of forgiveness you can practice, one moment of service you can offer, one prayer you can lift with sincerity. These small steps are not small at all. They are ways of tuning your life to the Christ pattern. And if you want to continue exploring the mysteries Edgar Cayce revealed, stay connected here. There are more insights, more testimonies, and more wisdom waiting to be uncovered together. Join this community, subscribe, share your thoughts, and let's walk this path of awakening as one. Because what Cayce showed us is not just history, it is the living invitation of Christ's cosmic power waiting within us right now. Edgar Cayce revealed, why water is a spiritual key hidden in the Bible and your body. Water, a substance so common, so ordinary, that we rarely stop to think about it. Yet Edgar Cayce, the man known as the Sleeping Prophet, revealed that water holds a spiritual power most people will never understand. In one of his most impactful readings during the Great Depression, Cayce stunned a family when he said, "Water is more than a physical necessity. It is a spiritual conductor." Imagine hearing this in a time when people were worried about food, shelter, and survival. To claim that water was not just about hydration, but a direct link between body, soul, and God, sounded radical. But Cayce backed it with explanations that merged the Bible, medicine, and the deepest truths of the human body. He showed that the water running through our veins, the water we bathe in, and even the water used in sacred rituals like baptism were all part of one hidden system of spiritual energy. And here is the shocking fact. Cayce insisted that neglecting the quality of the water we drink, or ignoring its role in spiritual cleansing, could disrupt not only the body, but also the soul's connection to higher consciousness. He was not talking about superstition. He was delivering revelations that connected directly with the words of Scripture, "Out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water." What Cayce uncovered was that this verse was not symbolic poetry. It was a literal key to understanding how divine life flows through us. During a session in Virginia Beach, Cayce went deeper. In trance, he spoke of how water absorbs vibrations. He said the energy of prayer over water changes its effect on the human body. Imagine this. Scientists decades later would discover the early theories of structured water, suggesting that molecules can align and respond to external influence. But Cayce had already described this in the 1930s. He urged people to bless their water before drinking it, to use baths as sacred rituals, and to treat springs and wells as portals of healing. To him, the body was a temple, and water was the sacred oil that kept the temple alive. Think of baptism. People often see it as a symbolic washing. Cayce insisted it was more than that. He revealed it as a spiritual reprogramming of the soul's energy field. The Bible says, "Unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God." To most, this is metaphor. To Cayce, this was spiritual science. He claimed that when water touches the body in sacred intention, it carries frequencies that recalibrate the soul. That is why Jesus used water so often in miracles. He did not need water to heal, but when he used it, he amplified its spiritual role so that others could understand its hidden design. And here is the pattern Cayce wanted us to see. In every moment of life, water is working silently in us, carrying divine light through blood, tears, and breath. But here is what nobody expected. Cayce warned that polluted water is not only a danger to the body, but also a contamination of the soul's pathway. He said during the war years that if nations poisoned their rivers, they would poison their spiritual evolution. Look at our modern age. Plastics, chemicals, toxic waste. And ask yourself, was Cayce's warning ignored? He was not preaching ecology. He was teaching metaphysics. Every glass of water you drink is either harmonizing your soul or disrupting it. That idea scared many who listened to him, but it also opened their eyes. In one reading, a man suffering from a chronic condition was told not only to adjust his diet, but also to soak daily in mineral-rich water. Cayce insisted that the minerals carried a vibration the body lacked, and through water they could be absorbed directly into the spiritual circuits of the body. Within months, the man reported changes his doctors could not explain. Cayce always made it clear, water is the bridge. It is the bridge between physical illness and spiritual healing, between the body we see and the invisible energy that sustains it. He urged people to meditate by the ocean, to walk beside rivers, to submerge themselves in pure springs, because these were natural altars of divine power. Think about this for a moment. Why does the Bible speak so often of water? From Genesis, where the Spirit moved upon the face of the waters, to Revelation, where the river of life flows from the throne of God. Why is water always present at the most sacred points of Scripture? Cayce said it was because water is the universal solvent, not only of matter, but of spirit. It dissolves what is impure, carries what is divine, and renews what is broken. When people asked him why Jesus chose fishermen as his first disciples, Cayce explained that it was symbolic. The men of water understood the language of flow, current, and surrender. Their lives prepared them to grasp spiritual truths others could not. And when Jesus washed the feet of his disciples, Cayce said it was not an act of humility alone, but a ritual of transmission, using water to cleanse and to imprint divine frequency. Suddenly, everyday water in a basin became a medium of eternity. Cayce also pointed to the hidden link between tears and prayer. He once told a grieving mother that her tears were not wasted. In a trance reading, he explained that tears themselves carry an energetic imprint of the soul's longing and are received as spiritual offerings in the higher planes. Each tear shed in faith, he said, becomes a crystal in the river of life. This was not poetic comfort, it was his way of teaching that water inside us responds to our deepest emotions. Modern science would later observe how water in the body shifts with emotional states, but Cayce spoke of it decades earlier. He urged people never to suppress emotions violently, but to allow the natural cleansing of tears, because they are a spiritual release as much as a physical one. Think of that moment the Bible records. Jesus wept. To Cayce, this was not just sadness, it was a divine recognition of the sacred role of water in carrying spiritual grief and transforming it into compassion. Suddenly, the ordinary act of crying became a channel of divine energy. One of his most striking insights came in a session during the early 1940s. Asked why certain sacred sites around the world always formed near rivers, springs, or lakes, Cayce explained that water fields magnify spiritual presence. "You will not find revelation in the desert without water," he said. He described how underground currents often meet beneath temples and cathedrals, creating fields of resonance. He even suggested that ancient civilizations like Atlantis knew this secret and built their healing centers near specific water flows. That idea startled those listening. Was it possible that what we considered geology was actually spiritual technology? Cayce believed so. He urged humanity to rediscover the way water amplifies prayer, meditation, and ritual, warning that without this knowledge, we live half-blind. Imagine the difference between praying in a dry room and praying near the ocean, with waves moving like the heartbeat of the earth. Cayce said one magnifies the other because water remembers, responds, and transmits. And here comes the shocking reversal that froze listeners in Hopkinsville during one session. Cayce claimed that baptism is not a one-time ritual. He said every shower, every bath, every immersion in water can become baptism if intention is present. He explained that what makes water spiritual is not its chemical structure, but the consciousness applied to it. When you step into a shower with bitterness and anger, the water absorbs that imprint. When you step in with gratitude and prayer, the water carries that energy into your body and leaves behind cleansing. Think of how revolutionary this sounded in the 1930s and 40s. People thought of bathing as hygiene, nothing more. Yet Cayce reframed it as an altar in every home, a daily opportunity for spiritual reset. It startled people but also transformed their habits. Families began blessing their water at meals, praying before bathing, treating rivers and lakes with reverence rather than mere resources. And those who followed Cayce's advice often reported a strange result. They felt lighter, calmer, and sometimes even healed in ways that doctors could not explain. But here is what nobody expected. Cayce connected water to memory itself. In a reading for a man suffering recurring dreams, he explained that the soul uses water in the body, especially the cerebrospinal fluid, as a conductor to carry impressions from one life into another. He said the liquid systems of the body are archives holding vibrations that echo across lifetimes. To modern ears, this may sound beyond belief, but Cayce described it as plainly as doctors spoke of anatomy. He said that when we meditate deeply, the movement of these waters within aligns with the cosmic river of consciousness. That is when visions, insights, and memories emerge. And this is why fasting with water or praying near bodies of water often triggered visions for prophets throughout history. It was not superstition, it was alignment with the design of creation. In one of his most impactful statements, Cayce declared, "Water is God's memory flowing through man." If this is true, then each sip, each drop, is a direct link between the divine and the human. In the years of the Great Depression, many families came to Cayce not only with spiritual questions, but with physical ailments they could not afford to treat. Again and again, Cayce prescribed water as medicine, but not in the way doctors did. He spoke of mineral baths, of compresses soaked in blessed water, of drinking spring water with conscious intention. In one remarkable case, a man suffering from paralysis was told to undergo hydrotherapy in warm mineral water while prayers were spoken aloud. Doctors scoffed, but the man reported gradual movement returning. Cayce explained that the minerals activated by water carried vibrations the nervous system could absorb, and the prayers altered the water's resonance to reach deeper layers of the soul. To Cayce, healing was not just physical intervention, it was a partnership with the spiritual currents of water. He would say, "The Spirit moves upon the face of the waters, even in your veins." During wartime, his readings took on a more urgent tone. He warned that the destruction of rivers and oceans would not only harm crops and bodies, but cut humanity off from spiritual renewal. He insisted that when waters are poisoned, entire communities lose their vitality and sink into despair. He foresaw that polluted waters would one day become one of humanity's greatest crises, not merely as an environmental issue, but as a spiritual famine. Look at our present day. Cayce's words seem prophetic. He once said, "Guard well the waters, for they are the channels of the soul's harmony." His followers began to see rivers as sacred texts written in liquid form, streams as sermons without words. Each drop, Cayce insisted, carries the possibility of healing or destruction, depending on how we honor it. And here is the moment that left many speechless. In Virginia Beach, during a group session, Cayce entered trance and spoke of the future of medicine. He predicted that water, charged with sound and light, would become a primary tool of healing. He described treatments where frequencies would be infused into water and then consumed, producing changes not only in cells, but in consciousness. At the time, it sounded like science fiction. Yet today, research into sound therapy, frequency medicine, and water memory has begun to echo his vision. How could a man with no medical training foresee such things? His stenographer, Gladys Davis, recorded every word, and these transcripts remain in the ARE archives to this day. Cayce also drew a direct connection between water and prophecy. He explained that water reflects the heavens, both literally and spiritually. Just as the stars reflect on the ocean's surface, so too do cosmic truths ripple in the waters of the earth. This is why ancient prophets, he said, often had visions by rivers, lakes, or wells. Elijah heard God's voice after rain. Moses struck water from a rock. Jesus calmed the storm. To Cayce, these were not coincidences. They were demonstrations that water is the mirror of divine order. As above, so below, he said, and water is the bridge. When listeners asked what this meant for the future, Cayce replied that the next great awakening of humanity would begin when men understand the waters within and without. But Cayce did not leave this knowledge in the abstract. He gave practical instructions. He urged daily prayer over water, simple words spoken with sincerity, to transform the very glass one drinks. He recommended ocean bathing, not only for physical health but to wash away psychic debris. He taught that placing water near the bedside during sleep could absorb negative vibrations from dreams, and that pouring it out in the morning symbolized release. These practices shocked people who thought of water only as a necessity, but to those who tried, results were undeniable. They felt clarity, peace, and sometimes profound dreams that guided their lives. What Cayce revealed is that water, hidden in the Bible and hidden in our bodies, is the most overlooked spiritual technology we possess. One of the most extraordinary cases recorded in the ARE archives involved a child suffering from a severe skin condition that baffled every doctor consulted. When the family turned to Cayce, he entered trance and gave instructions that seemed too simple to be true. Immerse the child in blessed water daily, using prayers and psalms spoken aloud during the bath. The parents followed his directions with faith, reciting passages from the Book of Psalms while pouring water over the child's skin. Within weeks, there was visible improvement. Within months, the condition had nearly vanished. Skeptics argued it was coincidence, but the family testified that after years of failed treatments, nothing had worked until they applied Cayce's reading. This was more than hygiene. Cayce insisted the prayers charged the water with vibrational healing that the child's body absorbed. To him, the Bible had always preserved this truth, but modern society had forgotten it. Cayce also revealed a hidden dimension of communion that shocked some listeners. While most churches emphasize bread and wine, he pointed to the spiritual significance of water itself. He said that when Jesus turned water into wine, it was not only a miracle of transformation, but a demonstration of how water carries the potential for divine frequency. The water was not changed, Cayce explained in trance. It was awakened. This statement left his audience silent. If water can be awakened, then every drop we encounter holds a dormant potential, waiting to be activated by spirit. That is why Jesus walked on water, because he was in total harmony with its frequency. To Cayce, this was not myth, but spiritual science in action. But here is where his revelations became even more personal. Cayce taught that the water inside your own body, the blood, the lymph, the cerebrospinal fluid, is also waiting to be awakened. He said that prayer, meditation, and gratitude can alter the vibrational state of these waters, changing health, emotions, and even destiny. Imagine that. Every thought you think is imprinted in the waters flowing inside you. Every resentment poisons them. Every prayer purifies them. This is why he urged people to examine not just what they drank, but what they felt, thought, and believed while drinking. A simple glass of water could be an act of despair or an act of resurrection, depending on the consciousness you brought to it. That truth has staggering implications. And Cayce was clear, this was not meant to stay hidden in archives or churches. He said, it was the responsibility of every soul to rediscover the sacred role of water in their own life. He warned that if humanity continued to ignore this, we would not only suffer physical disease but spiritual dryness, an age where people would drown in distraction and materialism while thirsting for meaning. Looking around today, does that not feel prophetic? Our rivers are polluted, our minds restless, and yet inside every one of us, the living water is still flowing, waiting to be recognized. Cayce left us with a choice: treat water as a commodity or as a spiritual key hidden in plain sight. Those who choose the second path, he said, will find healing, clarity, and connection with the divine. Cayce went further, connecting water directly to the idea of spiritual rebirth. In a 1932 session that later became one of his most cited, he declared, "The body is mostly water, and it is through water that the spirit renews the flesh." He tied this statement to the words of Jesus in the Gospel of John, "Whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst." Cayce explained that this was not just metaphor, but a literal teaching about consciousness. When the soul aligns with divine vibration, the waters inside the body become carriers of life force that sustains both health and spiritual growth. He even linked this to fasting and purification rituals across cultures. Whether it was Jewish mikvahs, Christian baptism, Hindu river immersions, or Native American sweat lodges, Cayce said all traditions were preserving the same truth. Water is the element chosen by God to reset the human being. And yet, he also gave a stark warning. In one wartime reading, he said, "As men pollute their waters, so will their minds be clouded. He foresaw a time when humanity's careless treatment of oceans and rivers would mirror an inner corruption, leading to disease, division, and despair. But he did not leave the prophecy in darkness. He also revealed hope. There will come a generation who will rediscover the sacredness of the waters, and with it they will find renewal of spirit. For his followers, this meant that every choice we make regarding water, whether blessing it, protecting it, or wasting it, becomes a spiritual choice with consequences beyond what we see. One of the most powerful demonstrations of this came in a healing that startled even his closest supporters. A woman bedridden with crippling arthritis was told to undergo a series of alternating hot and cold water therapies while scripture was read aloud. Her family followed the unusual instructions faithfully. As days turned into weeks, her pain began to lessen, her body to regain movement. To observers, it looked impossible. But Cayce explained that the changes in temperature created vibrations that the water transmitted through her nervous system, while the words of scripture awakened her spirit, allowing the healing to flow. This was water, not as symbol, but as a living medicine. The woman would later testify that it was not only her body that healed, but her faith that was restored. And here is the revelation that ties everything together. Cayce said that water is the only element that exists in all three states, solid, liquid, and vapor, just as the human being exists as body, mind, and spirit. Ice corresponds to the body, fixed and tangible. Liquid corresponds to the mind, flowing and adaptable. Vapor corresponds to the spirit, invisible yet essential. Water is the mirror of the soul, he said, because it shows you what you are in every form. With this simple but profound analogy, he turned ordinary water into a cosmic lesson. Every time you drink, bathe, or even watch the rain, you are seeing your own spiritual journey reflected back at you. It is hidden in plain sight in the Bible, in the body, and in the rhythms of life itself. Cayce's final teachings on water were not simply about healing individuals, they were about the destiny of humanity. In his later years, during sessions in Virginia Beach, he spoke of a coming age in which mankind would either rediscover the sacred nature of water or face a great reckoning. He described visions of coastlines changing, seas rising, and rivers shifting, not only as geological events, but as symbols of spiritual imbalance. He warned that if humanity continued to treat water as nothing more than a resource to exploit, we would suffer both environmental collapse and spiritual disconnection. But he also promised that if people reclaimed the biblical and mystical understanding of water as divine flow, there would be a renewal, a spiritual awakening unlike anything before. He insisted that the Spirit of God still moves upon the face of the waters, and that those who attune themselves to this truth will be carried into a new era of consciousness. For Cayce, the signs of this awakening would appear first in the simplest places, in the way families prayed over meals, in the way individuals honored water in their daily lives, in the way communities protected rivers and oceans. It begins with a single glass, he said. Imagine that, a prophecy that world transformation begins with how you hold water in your own hands. He tied this vision back to the book of Revelation, where the river of life flows from the throne of God, clear as crystal. To Cayce, this was not a distant symbol of heaven, but a reality that could be lived here and now. Every soul, he said, has access to that river, because it is flowing through your veins at this very moment. The question is whether you recognize it, bless it, and align with it. And here is the closing truth Cayce left us with. Water is not ordinary. It is not background. It is the living scripture of creation, hidden in plain sight. The Bible whispers of it from Genesis to Revelation. The body carries it as its main element, and Cayce revealed its role as the bridge between flesh and spirit. When you drink consciously, when you bless your water, when you immerse yourself with prayer, you are not performing superstition. You are awakening a law of creation. In every tear, every ocean, every raindrop, the Spirit is waiting. That is why Cayce said, "Keep the waters holy and you will keep the soul alive." So now the question is for you. How will you see water from this moment on? Will it remain just a liquid, or will it become the spiritual key Cayce revealed, a key hidden in the Bible and in your very body? The choice is yours. If this revelation stirred something in you, share it. If it opened your eyes to truths long forgotten, let it flow to others. Like water, wisdom is meant to be carried forward, never stagnant. Join us in exploring more of Cayce's hidden teachings, because this is only the beginning. If this video touched your soul, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your thoughts below. Have you ever experienced water as more than just water? Your story may inspire someone else searching for the same truth. And don't forget to activate the notification bell, because in the next video, we'll reveal another hidden key Cayce left for us, a secret that could change the way you see your own soul. Have you ever wondered why your cat suddenly stops dead in its tracks, staring at what appears to be absolutely nothing? Why they follow invisible movements with laser focus or back away from empty spaces as if something dangerous lurked there? Most people dismiss this as typical feline weirdness, but Edgar Cayce discovered something that would shake the foundations of how we understand our animal companions. It wasn't superstition. It wasn't imagination. It was documented spiritual reality that changed everything we thought we knew about cats. Through thousands of documented readings archived at the Association for Research and Enlightenment, Cayce revealed that cats possess what he called heightened vibrational sensitivity. But this wasn't just about seeing ghosts or spirits. What Cayce discovered was far more profound and practical than anyone expected. Your cat isn't just seeing things you can't see. Your cat is actively protecting you from them. The entity sees that which is not visible to the human eye, Cayce explained during one of his most fascinating sessions on animal consciousness. For the animal kingdom possesses those abilities to perceive vibrations, emanations, and presences that exist beyond the three-dimensional plane. But here's where it gets absolutely mind-blowing. Cayce didn't just confirm that cats could perceive spiritual dimensions. He revealed that they were serving as spiritual guardians, actively detecting and deflecting negative energies before those energies could affect your household. This wasn't coming from some mystical guru or ancient folklore. This was Edgar Cayce, the man whose medical diagnoses while in trance had been documented and verified thousands of times over decades of research. Think about the last time your cat positioned itself between you and a stranger who made you feel uneasy, or when your cat seemed agitated before you received bad news. According to Cayce's readings, your cat wasn't just being antisocial or randomly anxious. It was doing its job as your spiritual protector. Throughout the 1930s and 1940s, as America grappled with economic hardship and World War, people sought spiritual guidance like never before. Cayce's readings during this period consistently revealed that cats possessed an extraordinary ability to perceive what he called aural emanations, the energy fields surrounding both living beings and discarnate entities. More remarkable still, these feline guardians were naturally drawn to households where spiritual seeking was taking place. One family discovered this truth in the most unsettling way possible. Their cat had developed a strange ritual of positioning itself in their daughter's bedroom doorway every single night, never sleeping, always watching a specific corner of the room. When the cat began hissing at empty air and refusing to let the child near that corner, the desperate parents sought answers through a Cayce reading. What they learned changed their entire understanding of reality. The reading revealed that a confused spirit, someone who had passed but hadn't yet moved toward the light, was attempting to communicate with their daughter. But their cat wasn't just seeing this entity. It was serving as a protective barrier, preventing any unwanted spiritual contact, while gently encouraging the lost soul to continue its journey. The cat had essentially become a spiritual bouncer for their home. This wasn't an isolated incident. Cayce's files contained case after case of cats demonstrating this same protective behavior. They would position themselves strategically, create energy barriers, and sometimes even guide lost spirits away from their human families. It was as if these animals had been designed specifically for this purpose. But the most incredible revelation was yet to come. Cayce explained that cats don't just see spiritual presences, they actively communicate with them. In his words, cats serve as bridges between dimensions, often helping confused souls find their way to the light, while simultaneously protecting their human households from potentially harmful spiritual interference. Imagine discovering that your seemingly aloof cat has been having conversations with beings from other dimensions right in your living room. This wasn't passive observation. These were active spiritual interventions happening under your roof every single day. The implications were staggering, and they got even more mind-bending when Cayce revealed why cats seemed more psychically gifted than other pets. Unlike dogs, who had chosen to bond completely with human consciousness, cats had maintained their independence and thus retained their broader spiritual awareness. Their apparent aloofness wasn't indifference. It was spiritual discernment at the highest level. This explained everything that had puzzled cat owners for centuries. That intense stare into seemingly empty space, focused attention on spiritual activity, their uncanny ability to sense when you're sick or upset before you even realize it yourself. They're reading your aura and energy field like an open book. Their tendency to disappear during family arguments or high-stress situations. They're protecting themselves from negative energy while often working behind the scenes to help restore harmony. In one of his most fascinating revelations, Cayce described how cats often serve as spiritual messengers, carrying information between the physical and spiritual planes. Families would notice their cats exhibiting specific behaviors before receiving important phone calls, or positioning themselves near family members who were about to experience significant life changes. The cats weren't predicting these events. They were actively participating in the communication network that connected their households to broader spiritual guidance. During the war years, when anxiety and uncertainty filled American homes, Cayce received an unusual number of questions about animals sensing danger or providing comfort during difficult times. His readings revealed that cats were particularly attuned to the emotional and spiritual needs of their human families, often intensifying their protective and healing work during periods of crisis. One woman wrote to Cayce about her cat's strange behavior during her husband's overseas deployment. The cat would spend hours sitting by the window, not looking outside but staring intently at the wall as if watching something invisible. On the days when the cat seemed most agitated during these sessions, she would later receive news that her husband had been in danger at exactly those times. Through Cayce's reading, she learned that her cat was actually maintaining a spiritual connection to her husband, monitoring his well-being across thousands of miles and alerting her when he needed extra prayers and positive energy sent his way. This revelation transformed how we understand the human-animal bond. We weren't just sharing our homes with pets. We were living alongside spiritual beings whose primary purpose was helping us navigate invisible dimensions of existence. Every purr, every strategic positioning, every mysterious stare into empty space was part of an elaborate spiritual support system that most humans never even realized existed. But Cayce's insights went far beyond individual protection. He revealed that cats were actually helping to maintain the spiritual balance of entire households and communities. When multiple cats lived in the same area, they would coordinate their spiritual work, creating networks of protection and communication that spanned neighborhoods. This explained why certain areas seemed to attract more cats than others. They were drawn to locations where spiritual activity was high and their services were most needed. The Sleeping Prophet's readings also unveiled something extraordinary about how cats processed spiritual information. Unlike humans, who typically receive psychic impressions through dreams or meditation, cats were constantly aware of multiple dimensional realities simultaneously. They lived in what Cayce called expanded present awareness, experiencing past, present, and future spiritual influences all at once. This is why your cat might react to something that hasn't happened yet, or seem to be interacting with someone who passed away years ago. One of the most profound cases involved a family whose elderly cat had begun spending hours each day sitting in the empty chair of their recently deceased grandmother. Initially heartbroken by what they assumed was the cat missing the woman, they consulted Cayce for comfort. Instead, they received a revelation that changed their grief into wonder. The reading revealed that their grandmother was indeed visiting regularly, and the cat was serving as a bridge, helping to maintain the loving connection between the physical and spiritual family members. The cat wasn't mourning. It was facilitating an ongoing relationship that transcended death itself. This understanding completely revolutionized how families dealt with loss and grief. Suddenly, their cat's behavior became a source of comfort rather than confusion. When cats seemed to interact with invisible presences, families began to recognize these moments as opportunities for continued connection with departed loved ones. The cat became a translator between worlds, helping families understand that death was simply a transition rather than an ending. Cayce's readings during this period also revealed that cats were particularly sensitive to the spiritual development of their human companions. As people engaged in prayer, meditation, or other spiritual practices, their cats would often become more active in their guardian roles, responding to the increased spiritual energy and activity in the household. Many spiritual practitioners began noticing that their cats would position themselves nearby during meditation sessions, not as a distraction, but as spiritual amplifiers and protectors. The scientific implications were equally mind-bending. If cats could perceive dimensions of reality that humans had lost access to, what did this suggest about the evolution of consciousness itself? Cayce's readings implied that spiritual perception wasn't supernatural. It was simply a broader range of natural awareness that humans had temporarily sacrificed in exchange for advanced material manipulation abilities. Our ancestors once possessed these same gifts, communicating telepathically and perceiving spiritual dimensions as naturally as cats still do today. This created a fascinating evolutionary partnership. While humans had developed sophisticated abilities to shape the physical world through technology and intellect, cats had maintained their access to the complete spectrum of reality. Together, we formed complementary teams, humans handling material needs while cats managed spiritual protection and communication. The seemingly independent cat was actually the most devoted partner imaginable, working tirelessly in dimensions we couldn't even perceive. Cayce emphasized that by carefully observing feline behavior, humans could begin developing their own dormant psychic abilities. When a cat focused intently on a specific area, he recommended that people also pay attention to that space, quietly opening their minds to whatever the cat was perceiving. With patience and practice, many discovered they could begin sensing the same spiritual presences their cats had been monitoring all along. The cat became a spiritual teacher, helping humans remember abilities they had never truly lost. The transformation in households that embraced this understanding was remarkable. Instead of dismissing strange cat behavior as meaningless quirks, families began treating their feline companions as respected spiritual advisors. They started paying attention to their cats' reactions to visitors, trusting their spiritual assessment of new people and situations. They learned to interpret different types of cat behavior as various forms of spiritual communication and protection. During particularly turbulent periods in American history, Cayce noticed that cats' protective behaviors intensified dramatically. The spiritual stress of economic depression, war, and social upheaval created increased need for the kind of energetic clearing and protection that cats naturally provided. Families with cats reported feeling more stable and secure during these challenging times, not just because of emotional comfort, but because of the active spiritual work their feline guardians performed around the clock. One remarkable reading addressed a community-wide phenomenon, where local cats had begun gathering in unusual numbers around a particular church during evening prayer services. Rather than being a nuisance, Cayce revealed that these cats were responding to the concentrated spiritual energy of group prayer and were actually amplifying and protecting the congregation's spiritual work. The cats had recognized the church as a significant spiritual power point and had appointed themselves as its guardians. This revelation connected ancient wisdom traditions from around the world with modern spiritual understanding. The reverence for cats in Egyptian temples, their association with goddesses and sacred spaces, their role as guardians of spiritual knowledge, all of these traditions suddenly made perfect sense in light of Cayce's revelations. Ancient peoples had understood what modern humanity was only beginning to rediscover. Cats were natural spiritual allies, deserving of respect and partnership, rather than mere ownership. One of Cayce's most profound insights came during a reading in 1941, when he was asked about the spiritual purpose of animals in general. He explained that different animal species served different spiritual functions on Earth. Cats, he revealed, were specifically designed to be living sensors of spiritual activity, helping to maintain the balance between the physical and spiritual dimensions in human environments. This revelation reframed everything about the human-cat relationship. We weren't just caring for pets. We were sharing our homes with spiritual beings whose primary purpose was to help us navigate the invisible dimensions of existence. Every time a cat stared intently at something we couldn't see, every time they seemed to be tracking invisible movements, every time they positioned themselves protectively near us during times of stress or illness, they were fulfilling their cosmic purpose as bridges between worlds. Cayce's readings also revealed that cats were particularly sensitive to the spiritual development of their human companions. As people engaged in meditation, prayer, or other spiritual practices, their cats would often become more active in their spiritual guardian role, responding to the increased spiritual energy and activity in the household. This explained why many spiritual practitioners throughout history had reported unusual behavior from their cats during periods of intensive spiritual work. The scientific implications were equally fascinating. If cats could perceive dimensions of reality that humans typically couldn't access, what did this suggest about the nature of consciousness itself? Cayce's readings implied that spiritual perception wasn't supernatural at all. It was simply a broader range of natural awareness that most humans had temporarily lost access to through their focus on purely material existence. In reading after reading, Cayce emphasized that humans once possessed these same abilities. Our ancient ancestors could perceive auras, communicate telepathically, and interact with spiritual beings just as naturally as cats still do today. The difference was that human consciousness had become increasingly focused on the physical dimension, while cats had retained their connection to the fuller spectrum of reality. This created a fascinating partnership between humans and cats. While we had developed sophisticated abilities to manipulate the physical world, cats had maintained their access to spiritual dimensions. Together, we could create households that were both materially secure and spiritually protected. The cat's spiritual vigilance complemented our physical caretaking, creating a complete environment for both physical and spiritual well-being. Cayce's reading suggested that by observing our cat's behavior, we could actually begin to develop our own spiritual sensitivity. When a cat stared at a particular area of the room, Cayce recommended that humans pay attention to that space as well. Over time, with practice and patience, many people found they could begin to sense the spiritual presences their cats were observing. The cat became a teacher, helping to reawaken dormant spiritual abilities in their human companions. One particularly touching case involved an elderly woman whose cat had been acting increasingly protective and vigilant. Through Cayce's reading, she learned that her deceased husband was frequently visiting their home, and the cat was serving as an intermediary, helping to maintain the connection between the physical and spiritual dimensions of their continuing relationship. The cat wasn't just seeing a spirit, it was facilitating an ongoing, loving relationship that transcended death itself. This understanding transformed how people related to their cats. Instead of dismissing feline behavior as mysterious or aloof, families began recognizing their cats as active participants in their spiritual well-being. They started paying attention to their cat's warnings about certain people or situations, trusting their spiritual discernment about visitors and changes in the household energy. Cayce's revelations about cats also shed light on ancient spiritual traditions from around the world. The reverence for cats in Egyptian culture, their association with goddesses and temples, their role as guardians of sacred spaces, all of this aligned perfectly with Cayce's readings about feline spiritual sensitivity. Ancient peoples had understood what modern humanity had largely forgotten. Cats were natural spiritual allies, deserving of respect and partnership rather than mere ownership. The implications extended beyond individual households to our understanding of consciousness itself. If animals retained spiritual abilities that humans had largely lost, what did this suggest about the evolution of consciousness? Cayce's readings implied that spiritual development wasn't necessarily linear, that in some ways our animal companions had maintained connections to universal consciousness that could serve as guides for human spiritual reawakening. As we moved into the modern era, with its emphasis on scientific materialism and technological advancement, Cayce's insights about cats offered a bridge between ancient wisdom and contemporary understanding. Our feline companions weren't primitive beings we had evolved beyond. They were spiritual teachers who could help us remember abilities we had never truly lost, only temporarily forgotten. The next time you see your cat staring intently at what appears to be empty space, remember that you're witnessing something far more profound than unusual animal behavior. You're watching a spiritual being at work, serving as a guardian, messenger, and bridge between dimensions of reality. Your cat isn't just seeing more than you can, it's actively working to protect and guide your household through spiritual dimensions you're only beginning to rediscover. In our modern world of constant distractions and material focus, perhaps it's time to pay attention to what our cats have been trying to show us all along. They're not just pets sharing our homes, they're spiritual partners, helping us remember who we really are and what we're truly capable of perceiving. The question isn't whether cats can see things we can't. The question is, are we ready to learn from them how to see more clearly ourselves? Through Edgar Cayce's documented readings, we discover that the spiritual world isn't separate from our daily lives. It's right here, surrounding us constantly, perceiving and interacting with us through the wise, watchful eyes of our feline companions. They've been keeping us safe and connected to the broader reality of existence, one gentle purr and vigilant gaze at a time.